I'll begin today by speaking about a frustrating experience I had about a year and a half ago. The boiler in the presbytery had been visibly leaking diesel, and I had it repaired. However, after a few weeks, some parishioners whom I visited to bring them Holy Communion told me that I smelled strongly of diesel. Visitors to the presbytery on Sunday morning said that the smell of diesel was overwhelming. People kept telling me that I stank of diesel. Some said that it could even be smelled outside the presbytery. At first I thought they were exaggerating or imagining things. In the end, though, I had to take their word for it and get the boiler repaired properly. Why couldn't I smell the diesel? Because the diesel fumes were in the very air I breathed. Why am I telling you this story? Because it illustrates something about the way that the errors and unbelief of the society in which we live can undermine Catholic faith. In particular, errors about the Mass have become so common that most Catholics no longer smell them as un-Catholic. Without realizing it, we Catholics ourselves start to smell like the unbelieving world around us. Let me explain. The modern world, the world in which we live, was shaped in religious matters by two great revolutions against the Catholic faith. The first revolution was the Protestant Reformation, which occurred 500 years ago. The second revolution was modern secularism, which began to show itself clearly in the 18th century. Secularism is also often called secular humanism, since it puts man at the center of life rather than God. Both of these revolutions attacked the highest act of Christian worship, that is, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. I shall address first the Protestant Reformation. All the Protestant reformers rejected and condemned the holy sacrifice of the Mass. The 39 Articles of the Church of England say this: "The sacrifices of Masses, in which it was commonly said that the priest did offer Christ for the quick and the dead to have remission of pain or guilt, were blasphemous fables and dangerous deceits." The Heidelberg Catechism, which was widely used by Protestants in Germany, described the Catholic Mass as an accursed idolatry. That is why in England and Scotland and Ireland, the Mass was illegal. Catholics were imprisoned and executed for offering and attending the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which had been offered in England for more than 1,000 years. Instead of the Mass, the Protestant reformers instituted an English service of the Lord's Supper, celebrated to share the Lord's gift of himself and to build loving and grateful fellowship among believers, but not to offer sacrifice to God. Belief in the sacrifice of the Mass was destroyed in England 500 years ago, especially by the destruction of stone sacrificial altars and their replacement with plain wooden supper tables. In November of 1550, the King's Privy Council in England issued a decree with this explanation: "The use of an altar is to make sacrifice upon it. The use of a table is to serve men to eat upon. If we come to feed upon Christ, then no man can deny that the form of a table is more meet for the Lord's board than the form of an altar." For the Protestant reformers, the minister at Holy Communion was simply the servant at the Lord's table. He should say the Lord's words over bread and wine as a gospel proclamation and face the gathered communicants. The Protestant decision to turn the ordained minister toward the people was a deliberate rejection of the Mass as sacrifice. At first, the Catholic people of England, especially in the north, resisted this overthrow of the Mass. In Devon and Cornwall, there was a Catholic uprising in 1549 with much bloodshed in defense of the Mass. Over time, though, the Catholic opposition was worn down. In a couple of generations, the people got used to the new Protestant Lord's Supper service and ceased to believe in the Catholic Mass as Christ's own sacrifice. Like me, when I got used to the diesel smell in the presbytery, everyone got used to heresy. Over time, it smelled normal. Only a minority of faithful Catholics in England resisted this and were harshly punished for it, even with death. Priests who continued to offer the same traditional Latin Mass as their ancestors in England were forced out, exiled, and often executed in England as traitors to their king and to their country. Now, modern secularism or secular humanism is very different. Unlike the Protestant reformers, secularism puts man at the center of life rather than God. Secular humanism showed its most anti-Christian form in the French Revolution, which closed the churches in France and guillotined the priests and nuns and prohibited the sacrifice of the Mass, just as the Protestant reformers had done in England. In 1793, the revolutionaries enthroned in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris an actress to represent the goddess of reason. They wanted the worship of man rather than of God. In our own time, secular humanists often tolerate religion if it fosters community spirit or social service or psychological well-being. But the idea of worship of God for his own sake, for the love of God above all, by offering sacrifice, is completely alien to modern secularism. To secular people, the very idea of offering sacrifice to God seems meaningless and even primitive or barbarous, something that civilized humanity has left behind. We Catholic Christians believe otherwise. Catholic faith is primarily centered on the worship and service of God. However, many Catholics since the 1960s have been affected by both Protestantism and secularism, and have lost the awareness of the Mass as sacrifice offered to God. How did that happen? It happened in the same way as in England 500 years ago. Since 1965, in thousands of Catholic churches in the last 60 years, beautiful stone altars of sacrifice were destroyed and replaced with bare wooden tables. As in 1550, the priest at Mass was turned away from the cross and toward the people. The priest facing the people at Mass suggests that he is presiding over a family supper at a table rather than offering sacrifice to God at a sacred altar. The destruction of sacrificial altars and the turning of the priest toward the people also reflects the influence of secularism. The priest and congregation in most churches are no longer symbolically oriented to God through Christ crucified, but turned toward one another. This implies a humanistic or neighborly focus. The priest's ministry is then oriented primarily toward the world and toward community building, rather than toward the worship of God. That is contrary to the Catholic faith and to the nature of the ordained priesthood and of Catholic worship. Like the diesel fumes that I could no longer detect, these fumes of error and secularism have so pervaded Catholics that most of us are not even aware of them anymore. Pope St. John Paul II taught that the Eucharist is, above all else, a sacrifice, in which we offer to the Father what he himself has given us, that is, Jesus Christ himself. The Mass is the sacrifice of the cross, made present in an unbloody and sacramental way through the ministry of priests, who are Christ's living instruments. As Pope Benedict XVI taught, the Mass as a whole was never called, in Catholic tradition, a meal or supper or banquet. The reception of Holy Communion is only one important aspect of the Eucharistic sacrifice. I shall close with the words of the letter to the Hebrews. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire.